In a world of monsters, the only way to survive is to become one. So is the philosophy of the Plutonian Order of the God Emperor's Most Holy Inquisition and the Space Marines of the Exorcists Chapter. And in this case, a most unusual and unholy alliance has formed between the two, which has led to some of the darkest deeds and fates in the entirety of the 41st millennium. And considering the average Tuesday in the blood-soaked future, that's saying something. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's begin at the very start, shall we? With the foundation of the Plutonians, a radical section of the God Emperor's Most Holy Inquisition. One that is, in fact, so radical, it is not even officially recognized by its members. And considering that there exists such ordo minorises like the Horusians, who believe that War Master Horus was right in all regards, but in that he failed to fully control chaos, that should give you some idea of just how radical the Plutonians are. So who exactly are the Plutonians, and what makes them so radical? Well, first and foremost, no such thing as the Plutonians actually exist. Not in official records, not in Ordo records, not even in the sealed inquisitorial archives. And you won't find a single inquisitor willing to admit to being a part of this Ordo Minoris. In fact, it's not even an Ordo Minoris at all. The Plutonians are not real. Or so you had better believe if you know what's good for you. Regardless, if we are to entertain these fairy tales, then at some point preceding the 35th millennium, a group of inquisitors came together to discuss how to solve the problem of chaos. As you will no doubt be aware, this is a frequent topic for conversation in inquisitorial circles, as, well, it is kind of literally their job description. However, unfortunately, chaos has proven damnably difficult to solve on any sort of a permanent basis. And really, the only thing the Inquisition has learned over the years is that there isn't a permanent solution to the chaos problem. A permanent solution. That was the sliver of hope that this unknown group of inquisitors latched onto. For if there is not a permanent solution, what about a temporary one? Now, obviously, there is the good old-fashioned banishing of demons, a temporary solution at best, as of course when a demon is banished, they do not die. In the case of lesser demons, who are simply manifestations of their master's will, they simply fade back into the warp. They had no true personality to begin with, and will simply reform as another mindless avatar of their god when called upon. In the case of greater demons or demon princes, these entities have souls, or whatever the demons have that are a rough equivalent to this anyways. These are the named demons, the demons that have some sense of self. Now, greater demon is a bit of a misnomer because they don't need to be a greater demon as in have a greater demon's standing to possess this. They simply need a greater understanding of what they are, who they are, and that they exist at all, beyond the mindless blind violence of, say, for example, a bloodletter. Still, the problem remains the same. Kill one demon and it'll simply just reappear. In certain instances, like near a major warp rift, killing the demons themselves is essentially pointless, as they'll re-emerge mere moments later from whence they spawned originally. This lack of Death is one of Chaos's greatest strengths, as in theory, a champion of Chaos can simply come back again and again and again, no matter how many times is required, until finally victory, be it by plot or violence, is theirs. Seemingly then, the eventual victory of Chaos is inevitable. And yet, once more, the Inquisitors latched on to a detail. The devil is, of course, as we all know, in the details, namely that the demons only reform when they return to the warp. So if a demon could be contained, jailed, imprisoned, then they couldn't return to the warp. It also means that you cannot slay them, but surely if you can incapacitate them and contain them, well, the galaxy is a very, very large place. And would not that be almost as good as killing them? But even so, it's a ridiculous idea. You cannot build a cell to contain a demon. Half of them have blood made out of liquid metal. No matter how thick the walls are, the damn thing will simply just keep vomiting on them until it melts all the way through, or fill the chamber with poisonous, noxious gases that literally erodes the metal, or phase through the walls for that matter. Jailing a demon is essentially impossible. Enough psychic wards can stem them for a time. You could potentially enclose them in a room and bind psychers to watch over it forever, but psychers are a far rarer resource than demons, unfortunately. Even taking into account the theoretically unlimited resources and access of the Inquisition, it seemed a losing strategy. That is, if we bind them in cells of iron. But there is another prison that demons will enter into willingly. One of flesh and blood and bone. At which point, I have no doubt, a chill went through the gathering of Inquisitors. Surely many would have backed out right then and there, seeing where this is going. But clearly, a serious nucleus of Inquisitors remained behind to hear this outlandish idea. For the Plutonians' reach is remarkable, considering their presumably limited size. For they managed to engineer an entire founding of the Adeptus Astartes, the 13th founding, which took place at some point, either in the 35th or the 36th millennium, and many of the chapters created during this founding have either been lost, hushed up, or made so secretive that not even the Inquisition knows where they are, who they were, or what happened to them. But one of the chapters created, the Exorcists, were kept under particularly close scrutiny by agents of the Inquisition, who had interfered in the founding's goals and aims in the first place. The intended aim of the 13th founding was to create space marines that were immune, hopefully, or at the very least extraordinarily resilient to the touch of chaos, with mixed success. But the Exorcists were perhaps the early favorites, rumored to be sons of Rogal Dorn, and rumored to occasionally have a darker origin as well. Perhaps in relation to a certain fan of religious literature. Considering their unbending stubbornness and unwavering loyalty, either could be true. Whichever set of gene-enhanced loins they sprung from, though, is largely irrelevant, as the Exorcists proved themselves to be a highly effective Space Marine chapter. But early on in their career, they went to rescue a small Imperial world by the name of Totem 4. It had become the target of a Zinchian greater demon's none too gentle attention, and the Exorcists engaged the monster and its minions in most heroic and ferocious battle, where the demon, much to its chagrin, noted that its usual psychic might felt impotent before these red-armored space marines. If the usual sorcery would not avail him, then perhaps a more direct method would. Choosing to abandon his minions and instead strike directly at the Space Marine's head, the greater demon, Keriath the Shrouded, forced its way past the mental defenses of the Exorcists Chapter Master, who possesses the mildly challenging name Enoch Trismegistus. Finding the name, however, little challenge, the demon swiftly swept aside the Chapter Master's mental defenses. It was an uneven struggle at the best of times. A greater demon of Tzeentch can easily crush even a mind as determined as that of a Space Marine leader, and taking control over his body, he wreaked tremendous damage on the Exorcists Chapter. However, unusually, Enoch's mind was not snuffed out like a candle in the face of a hurricane. Instead, it remained fighting within his own body, witnessing the horrors that the monster now enacted upon his chapter. In desperation, he refused to simply surrender and give in, and slowly but surely he managed to claw back ground against the demon, in no small part due to latent psychic powers that he had been up until then unaware of. Using his newfound and barely understood gift, he managed to contact via a telepathic link the Exorcist's chief librarian, Goetos. Guiding his chapter master through the mental rites required, the two managed to open up a psychic conduit into the chapter master's mind. Now, even this would normally have been a hopeless gesture. A chief librarian is a potent psyker, no doubt, but no match for a greater demon, especially not one of Tzeentch. Trickery and psychic powers is literally his vocation. But again, something interesting had happened. Whilst struggling with the demon's mind, Enoch had learned many interesting secrets about it. He had gleaned a certain twisted understanding of the demon's being, of its behavior, and of its plans. And guiding the librarian as the librarian had guided him, they struck together a mighty blow against the weakest link of the demon's hold over the chapter master, and managed to not only banish it from his body, but drive it screaming back into the warp. And the moment its soul left this reality, its body and its minions followed suit. A most unusual turn of events. Perhaps one of the first recorded instances of any such thing happening in the history of the Imperium. Oh well. Excuse me, recorded? I think not. As agents of Ordo Malus, I'll give you 3 guesses as to where their real loyalties lay, swooped in and declared that they were taking the chapter master, the librarian, and the entire chapter under their supervision. Obviously, the excuse given at the time was because they were clearly worried that this possessed chapter master was simply hiding his possession, that the beast still remained lurking in the corners of his mind, biding its time to bring yet further ruin upon the Imperium. And honestly, it wasn't even much of a lie, really. Even the most optimistic of Plutonian was no doubt near convinced that that was what had happened, that their far-fetched scheme could not possibly have succeeded, and certainly not so soon. They ordered the entire chapter back home to their bleak, swampy homeworld of Banish, where they imprisoned the chapter master and subjected him to a relentless battery of interrogation that lasted for more than a month. And yet at the end of it, they could come to no other conclusion than that the chapter master, Enoch Trismegistus, was entirely pure. There was no trace of psychic corruption within his body or his soul. He remained fully in command of his wits and faculties, and no outside entity appeared to have any sway over his emotions, his actions, or his thoughts whatsoever. The man had not only survived, but recovered from a demonic possession by no lesser an entity than a greater demon. Even then, the Plutonians probably couldn't even believe their luck that their harebrained scheme had seemingly succeeded. Well, succeeded once, that is. Clearly, a lot more data was required. And there was only one way to get that data: to repeat what had happened to the Chapter Master, but on a much larger scale. But first, there were a few things that needed doing. Secrecy needed to be assured, because even with one successful case, this was still pushing the tolerance of even the most radical of Inquisitors. This could not come out at any cost, that the Inquisition was not only creating Daemonhosts, but were, in essence, planning to willfully infect an entire chapter with demons. Because here's the thing, the creation of Daemonhosts was nothing new even at this point in history. The Inquisition had known for quite some time that it was possible to bind demonic entities into fleshy forms, and assert a certain degree of control over them. Many misguided Inquisitors had, early on in the Ordo's history, attempted to turn these demon hosts into weapons that could be used against chaos. Fight fire with fire and all that. The issue was that demons were willful little suckers, and rarely remained quiescent for overly long. And the demon tended to have a hell of a lot more in the way of patience and experience than even the most skilled of Inquisitors. Simply put, the key flaw, the inevitable Achilles heel in the idea of using chaos to fight chaos was simply that chaos knew a hell of a lot more about chaos than the Imperium did. And literally immortal entities had all the time in the world for the mortals to make a mistake. And this was one hell of a mistake. Potentially, at least, that these Inquisitors were about to make. Worst case scenario, not only would they rob the Imperium of a chapter of Space Marines, they might create 1,000 demon hosts, bound within the bodies of superhuman soldiers. Some security measures were needed. The Ordo Malus summoned elements of the Grey Knights, their chamber militants, and I imagine there were some testy negotiations at that point. Or possibly the Plutonians simply lied to the Grey Knights. Honestly, I imagine the latter to be the more likely. They also gained the acceptance of the Chapter Master of the Exorcists and his chief librarian. They then began extensive reconstruction and expansion work on the Exorcists Chapter fortress, the Basilica Malefax. Located deep underneath the actually literally corrosive acid swamps of their home planet, it was already a natural fortress, but it was expanded upon and reinforced tremendously at the hands of the Ordo Malus, with enormous new wings added to it at the deepest depths of the swamps. These new chambers would be heavily reinforced in every way. Meters thick adamantium walls, constant layer upon layer of walls, endless gun servitors and minefields that would only let people with constantly changing passcodes through. Every precaution was taken, and even then I'm sure the Inquisitors who were guiding the work knew that it would all be pointless if the worst thing was to happen, and yet the reward was so close. Finally, having finished their work, they set about the first trials. The goal of these initially was to see if the chapter master's case was a mad fluke, or if it could be reliably repeated. A few dozen battle brothers at first, those noted for particular stubbornness and capabilities, were brought down into the new secret depths and bound with chains both material and psychic. Then demonic entities were lured into the depths of the fortress monastery and allowed to possess the brothers for the equivalent of 12 Terran Standard hours, half a day, and crucially 1 hour short of 13. Then the demon would be banished using the psychic might of several psychers, presumably possibly even the Grey Knights and Inquisitors themselves. The Battle Brothers would then be taken, still fettered to every level, to interrogation cells, where their mental stability would be poked and prodded, and they would no doubt undergo countless experiments and tests to make sure that they came out of it the same person as they went in, or at the very least, a reasonable approximation. Immediately it was clear that the process was far from harmless, as some of the Battle Brothers had had their minds shattered, irreversibly so by their experience. Others had been changed to the point where the Inquisitors were none too happy to let them live. But others had remained unchanged, and seemed to be the perfect reflection of the chapter master's own experiences. Obviously, Enoch himself was consulted at length about the state of each individual brother. Their battle brethren themselves too were consulted to make sure that their behavioral patterns remained comparable to when they were merely normal. But after, no doubt again, weeks and months of trials, the Inquisitors were satisfied that yes, the phenomenon could be recreated, and yes, it could be recreated on scale. Moving over then to large-scale testing, some 2 companies, 200 Space Marines were eventually successfully bonded and then separated from the demonic entities that had temporarily taken possession of their flesh. Each and every one, in turn, reported much the same experiences as Chapter Master Enoch, in that they had learned things from the demons that the demon clearly didn't want them to know. That they had been able to scry knowledge from the demons' minds, even as the demons themselves tried to take over the brothers' minds. One final assumption, then, remained to test. Would this experience and this insight prove to make the Exorcists superior demon fighters? Firstly, they would need to be equipped for the task ahead. Mundane weaponry has a nasty habit of not being overly effective against demons. But every battle brother, of course, could not be equipped with psychic weaponry. They did not have the training nor the skills to wield them. No matter what they did, these would never be the equals of the Grey Knights, but they could approximate them, perhaps. And to aid them in doing so, they were granted, as the singular exception in the entire galaxy, access to the 666 verses of the Liber Exorcismus, giving them, in essence, access to the same kind of information about demons, the banishment and their true names, as the Grey Knights. Once more, I imagine some very testy diplomacy must have been carried out at some point here. This is also why I imagine that this group of Inquisitors must be incredibly influential to make the Grey Knights give up some of their most precious and closely guarded secrets. The kind of stuff that they would normally never reveal to anyone else. As I remind you, the 666 words of banishments and the Liber Daemonica, the essential progenitor and full version of the Exorcist's own little book of banishment, are beyond classified. As normally, even having knowledge of the existence of this knowledge would be considered a corrupting threat. But the reward was deemed to be worth the risk, and the two companies of exorcists were taken under heavy guard, including Grey Knights squads. And remember again how incredibly rare the Grey Knights are, how incredibly valuable their time is. For them to be dedicated to babysitting once more reaffirms the influence of the Inquisitors in question, and perhaps the hope the Grey Knights had of no longer being humanity's one and only final defensive line. But more likely, it was because both Inquisitors and Grey Knights were expecting the Exorcists to turn upon them at any moment. The two companies of exorcists were unceremoniously dumped onto a demon world on the northern edge of the Eye of Terror, where they figured the exorcists would either swim or be torn apart in demonic hellfire. Either way, the Inquisition would gather valuable intelligence. It would also get rid of a potential renegade company or two should the worst occur. But the Inquisition was pleasantly surprised. Not only did the exorcists remain loyal throughout their transportation and their deployment and even their eventual recovery, but their efficiency was beyond doubt. Being dropped down with only their basic armaments, no heavy support, no full chapter strength, no nearby supporting elements, armor, or anything, they achieved a ratio of 97 demons destroyed to each and every battle brother lost. Now, for the Grey Knights, those might be rookie numbers, but for any Astartes chapter, that was cream of the crop. And finally, for the first time in many months, the Inquisitors allowed themselves a moment to hope. Maybe they had come upon something revolutionary here. Far more testing would be required, of course, but it looked as if the Inquisitors had found a way to use chaos against chaos without actually using chaos actively. They had discovered a way to unveil the secrets and the weaknesses of chaotic entities without having to wield the powers of chaos to do so. The ancient secret as to how to fight fire with fire might finally be revealed. The ban on the chapter's recruitment was immediately lifted. The exorcists were brought back to their planet of Banish, where their fortress monastery was expanded upon yet further. The chapter's charter was updated to special status. They would become, for all intents and purposes, ghosts. Gone in all official imperial records, kept solely for the purview of the uppermost echelons of Ordo Malus and the Plutonians themselves, as they still knew they were treading on dangerous ground. The mere suggestion that they were habitually infecting space marines with demons would see every one of them burned 7 times over. But for now, the procedure would be expanded to every member of the chapter. This demonic possession therapy, an uninspired name if ever I've heard one, would be carried out on every member of the chapter currently in existence, and then all Battle Brothers upon their transformation from Scout Neophyte to full Line Brother. Of course, the transformation process in the case of the Exorcists is a bit more extreme than in most chapters, and the attrition is also significantly greater. This is why the Exorcists are not an entirely Codex-compliant chapter. Despite wanting to keep their heads as low as possible so as to avoid notice, they maintain 12 companies rather than the usual 10, with the 11th and 12th, and previously the 10th as well, being scout companies. So they in essence retain more than 3 times the neophytes of any equivalent chapter, due again to the attrition of the ritual. It has, however, seemed well worth it, as the Exorcists have become tremendous assets to the Ordo Malus, with their greatest achievement to date being the cleansing of Opridia, where thousands of demonic entities were purged with only a single company of Exorcists deployed. They also have a long line of stunning victories against the forces of the arch-enemy, including the banishment of great and powerful demons that would normally require the attention of the Grey Knights themselves. Their elite, the Enochian Guard, have specialized to the point where they can now be considered perhaps even almost the mild equals of their vaunted grey-armored idols? Maybe. And they have not sacrificed their combat potential in more traditional engagements either. They have not completely become a dedicated chapter of demon hunters, as we can see from their participation in the war for Badab, for example. They remain equally skilled at dealing with Tyranids, with Orcs, with Chaos, with the renegade Space Marines, and anything else that the galaxy sees fit to throw at them. This has made the Exorcists a tremendous, near unrivaled achievement in the current day Imperium, as the only real equivalent would be the founding of the Grey Knights themselves, something that the Imperium today would never be able to equal. But there have been a few hiccups along the way here and there. The need for absolute secrecy, of course, is paramount, because should somebody learn of all of this, they might take a different view from what the Plutonians have. Some might denounce them and threaten to spread the knowledge of the Exorcists Chapter wide and far, which would almost certainly cause a full-scale schism within the Inquisition and the Imperium, probably leading to a civil war. Best case scenario, only the Exorcists are declared excommunicatus traitoris, and anyone bound to them is, again, warmed at the stake. But there are also examples of those who have gotten a little bit too optimistic about the seeming capabilities of the Exorcists' new battle brothers. This can be seen in Cardinal Rodrigo Newson. In all due likelihood, this was the Plutonians' efforts to begin broadening acceptance of their views and practices by bringing in agents from outside of their own closed-off ordo, as Rodrigo was not an inquisitor. He was a trusted and vetted agent of the ecclesiarchy. And I guarantee you they would have vetted him to the ends of the earth and back before allowing him to come to Banish and delve into the depths of the Fortress Monastery, where he was allowed to witness the transformation process. Again, this was in all due likelihood, in essence, a PR move. The Plutonians know that having a single chapter of Exorcists is all well and good, but this seems like a genuine, actual, unironic breakthrough, like a revolution, and they want, undoubtedly so, to spread this knowledge, to tell everyone else that yes, you can use chaos without using chaos. Imagine what 10 chapters like the Exorcists could do, 20, 100, a whole founding perhaps. The forces of chaos might actually be driven back, and due to their unique capabilities, maybe even the borders of the eye itself will no longer be quite so inviolate. But that was also the problem, as Cardinal Rodrigo got very excited. So excited indeed that he decided to make it a bit of an experiment of his own, as he took several battle brothers that had failed the process and were set to be executed, presenting a real danger to the chapter and the Imperium, and fled with them. How, by the god Emperor's tungsten balls, he managed that from beneath the surface of Banish is beyond me or anyone else. But they made it. They didn't get far, however, until the Cardinal's influence was made clear, as he hadn't come up with this all by his lonesome. He was an unknowing puppet of the ruinous powers, and his swords of epiphany quickly turned into outright chaos marines. No doubt his masters were intending to try and spread the knowledge of this chapter's secret far and wide in an effort to destroy them. But, in the Exorcist's defense, they recognized the threat immediately, and wasted no time in chasing down and doggedly exterminating every last one of their escaped ex-brethren, managing to avoid the worst-case scenario, at least in this instance. We can also, incidentally, see the interest that the ruinous powers have taken in the Exorcists. During the events of the Indomitus crusade, that part of the lore that I frankly no longer care about, but it is an interesting data point in this particular case, as the fleet bearing Primaris Marines to reinforce the Exorcist chapter was set upon by unbelievable quantities of demons, far more so than any other relief fleet. The elements that finally made it to Banish had lost all of their original Primaris complement, and they had only barely managed to bring a handful of vessels to grant the Exorcists the knowledge of how to create Primaris Marines of their very own. This suggests that the Chaos powers wanted to stop the Exorcists reinforcing at all costs. But they failed, and the Primaris Marines appear to be compatible with the Exorcists' habits as well. Although the Primaris Marines have shown moodiness beyond the norms of their other brethren. They are prone to flights of fancy and sudden and drastic mood changes. Well, we all know it anyways, the Primaris Marines are going to turn chaos one of these days, especially now that GW has pretty much apparently decided to discontinue the production of the old school Space Marines. Hardly a shocker, we all saw it coming, but it is still annoying, isn't it? Particularly considering how much money a great deal of people have put into those Marines, but we are wandering off the point here. The Exorcists are going to have to keep themselves secret for quite some time still, and in particular because of another little experiment. For you see, if all they were hiding was that they possessed their marines and they became superior demon hunters, then okay, it's not the worst thing, now is it? You could probably convince a fair few of the more adventurous Inquisitors of the benefit of such an arrangement, surely. But there is a deeper secret. Because, you see, not only do the Exorcists prove themselves to be remarkably resilient to demonic corruption, they've also proven capable of containing the demons. We talked previously about the idea of a Daemonhost, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is the process of binding a demon into a material form. This is normally something that the demons want to have happen, as they can quickly take over that form and warp it into one more suitable to their needs. But with the application of the correct wards, the correct blockages, the correct prayers and guidance, this process can be forestalled and not inevitably, but delayed for quite some time at the very least. To the point that the entity's powers can be harnessed and guided. However, with the Exorcists, this has taken on a completely different aspect, as whilst the demon is not capable of wresting command over the Space Marine, it is not capable of taking him over or fully possessing him, it is also not able to leave him, creating the aforementioned prison of flesh and blood and bone. These are referred to by the Exorcists as the Broken Ones, for obvious reasons. They are the adepts that fail the bonding process, whose demons cannot be driven out. Now, normally, of course, they simply just executed these failed experiments, but one Inquisitor clearly thought, hey, what if? And tried to put them through the ritual again, entrapping a second demon. And then again, and a third, and then again, and a fourth, and then again, and a fifth. To this date, it appears that the body of an Exorcist Space Marine can contain a seemingly infinite number of chaotic entities that can be bound and tied forever within the flesh of the brother. This has become one of the Exorcist's most ferocious weapons against the demons, and the reason why the demons hate them so. If they were simply superior demon killers, even the demons wouldn't care that much. They'd be beaten, so what? They'll come back in 100 years. But now, when they're defeated, not only are they banished, they are tied within a prison of flesh from which they can never escape. This eternal life is, interestingly enough, the closest that a demon will ever come to death, as they cannot be reborn, they cannot be recreated, and they cannot escape. Now, obviously, this requires the body of the brother as well to be kept alive, in a constant tortured state. It is an enormous, daunting sacrifice, but one that the Exorcists commit to with absolute unwavering faith and fealty, as this allows them to again actually kill demons. Theoretically, if this practice was widespread enough, perhaps even the taint of demons could be annihilated, if there is such a thing as a limited number of demons. Then the question is only how many deep, dark corners of the universe you are willing to dedicate to their storage, really. For now, the Exorcists have created the Purgatum. Precise information as to this vessel's location, its size, its defenses, its scale, its armaments, its guards, are all, again, closely guarded secrets. But it must be an enormous vessel. It must be heavily guarded, and probably heavily armed and armored as well. I would not at all be surprised to learn that it was in essence a star fort, where the Exorcists keep all of their broken one brethren, in what is essentially an enormous prison colony for demons. Obviously, this is not kept anywhere near Banish, as keeping these demons nearby would be dangerous. And if I was the one managing this station, I'd place it in a constantly terminal orbit around a star that can only be kept stable by the constant application of thrusters, so that if anything were to happen, the thing would simply plunge into the sun, never to be seen again. Both to make sure that its occupants cannot escape, and to make sure that no evidence of its existence could ever potentially be found. And isn't that quite the thing? The Imperium finally found the silver bullet against chaos, but it can't fire it because it looks too much like chaos. Just another day in the Imperium, isn't it? As the Exorcists will no doubt continue to offer valuable service to the Imperium, whilst keeping a secret why and how they are doing it. Just another little self-inflicted wound. Unless, of course, at some point in the future, all of the Exorcists go crazy, and with the way the Primaris parts of the chapter are behaving, that is not entirely impossible. But until that day, some of the Imperium's greatest heroes will simply have to labor on in darkness. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see all of you again soon. Till then, have a good day.